We've got a slight change in the speaker for our last presentation. Unfortunately, Karen sends her apologies, but we're really fortunate that we've been able to get Sothea Tep, who's the team leader from the food policy, food safety regulations at MPI. And from his bio, I think one of the key things which will be really important for this afternoon session, and we've already had some questions around it, Sol led the regulation of inhibitors under the Agricultural Compound and Veterinary Medicines Act 1997. So welcome, Sol.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I am the team leader in the Food Safety Regulatory Policy team at MPI. So we sit in the Policy and Trade branch. So the team oversees food safety policy and food safety legislation, including the Food Act, the Wine Act, the Animal Products Act, and the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Act. So today I'll be talking to you about regulatory stewardship in a changing world. You can drive a bus through that, but I will talk about it specifically from the ACVM policy lens. But I'll also talk to you about the regulation of inhibitors in New Zealand and what the regulatory landscape is looking like internationally. So from an ACVM perspective, well, as we all know, the world is changing quite quickly. We're starting to see new technologies, novel technologies being developed and introduced. In agriculture, we're seeing developments in inhibitors as a key tool to help meet emissions and mitigate the environmental impacts of agriculture. And hopefully we'll be able to see the acceleration of that under the Centre for Climate Action and the joint venture. Inhibitors, they can be a key tool in the toolbox that can provide great benefits, but they may also come with risks. It is also important to understand these risks and their potential impacts. This is so that we can ensure the current existing policy settings and the regulatory settings can manage those risks appropriately and adequately. And if not, what changes are required so that we can benefit from these technologies while protecting the public. There's also an ongoing need to consider, as these technologies develop, whether the policy settings and regulatory settings remain appropriate and fit for purpose. We can expect the regulatory settings to change as technologies progress, as our knowledge and understanding of these technologies grow, and as the risks change. What I see regulations as is more of an enabler and not in a legal sense, but from a social point of view. The social license in using chemicals in agricultural production is constantly evolving. We are seeing increasing public interest in chemicals used in agricultural production due to the concerns of residues in food, their environmental impacts, as well as animal welfare. So maintaining a good regulatory oversight can help to maintain that social license. As with any good regulatory system, and this kind of echoes some of the comments from other speakers, is that everybody needs to work together. So people, businesses, and the regulator to kind of reach the outcome that can benefit us all. So why are inhibitors being regulated under the ACVM Act? Well, there are a number of drivers. These include animal and plant health, food safety, international trade, as well as stakeholder concerns over the lack of their regulatory oversight. As previously mentioned before, DCD is a prime example of why the lack of regulatory oversight can create issues. So the incident in 2012 and 13, when low levels of residues were found in exported dairy products, caused significant trade disruption. This ultimately led to DCD being voluntarily withdrawn from the New Zealand market. So DCD was not considered to pose any food safety risks, but because there were no standards that existed, the detection of residues raised consumer concerns and caused a reaction from some trading partners. It is important that events like these can be prevented. In 2020, MPI undertook public consultation on strengthening the regulatory oversight of inhibitors so that their potential risk can be better managed. Feedback from the consultation indicated that stronger regulation was necessary. This led to Cabinet agreeing in 2021 that the strengthening of regulation of inhibitors was needed and that the ACVM Act was the appropriate mechanism. The Act's purpose is to prevent or manage risks from using agricultural compounds and the risks that relate to them, including animal and plant health, food safety, and international trade. In terms of animal and plant health, inhibitors applied to them can have similar health impacts to that of agricultural chemicals and veterinary medicines. The ACVM Act also enables the assessment of residues in food and dietary exposure related to food safety, but also provides the ability to manage international trade risks from residues in exported food. So risk management under the ACVM Act. The general outcome is to manage the risk of agricultural compounds to an acceptable level to support the overall goal of growing and protecting New Zealand. While agricultural compounds can help improve productivity, protect crops, they can also be a cause of harm. So the aim is to gain the benefits from using these compounds while keeping risks of harm down. Finding the acceptable level of regulatory interventions, particularly for new and novel technologies, can come with challenges. Over and under regulation can create negative impacts and would not support the overall goals of risk management under the Act. So as the Minister said earlier this morning, the regulation of inhibitors is we believe to be sitting at the appropriate level because the risks are outweighing the rewards at the moment. So it is important, though, to kind of keep those considerations of the policy and regulatory settings to match what the level of risk is. Because the ACVM Act is concerned with risk management, it also has a relationship with other acts like the Animal Products Act, the Food Act, which sets MRLs, and the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act that the EPA oversee. And over time, I expect the regulatory settings around inhibitors to change, as I said earlier, as the technology progresses and as risk levels change. There are benefits from the ACVM Act, for inhibitors going through the ACVM regulatory regime. It provides a level of regulatory assurance for farmers so they can be confident that these products are safe and fit for purpose. But also can provide assurances to consumers and they can be confident that these products do not pose a food safety risk. So how are we doing this in New Zealand? Well, initially we thought it was going to be relatively easy, but it has been a bit more complicated through to our legislative limitations. And so we're doing this in two steps. The first is being by an order in council to declare certain inhibitor substances to be an agricultural compound under the Act. Now this is an interim measure and it has its limitations because substances that aren't declared on the order won't be subject to the ACVM Act. There are currently 46 substances on the order at the moment, but this can be amended as needed to include more. The order came into force on 18th of July, and alongside that, the ACVM regulations were amended to allow for a 2-year transitional period for products that were already on the market at the time. Now, the interim measure is quite messy. I won't go through the ins and outs of it, but we do have a permanent solution. And that permanent solution is to amend the ACVM Act and the definition of agricultural compounds, effectively so that inhibitors can be covered by the Act. This will mean that when the Act is changed, all inhibitors, including those that are outside the Order in Council, will be subject to the ACVM Act. Now, we're doing this through a Regulatory Systems Amendment Bill, the time frame for which is still uncertain. Now, just a few more slides. So what is the international regulatory landscape for regulating inhibitors? Well, it's variable at the moment. It can range from nothing at all to a passive approach where regulations do capture it, but there is no registration required. There could be a partial regulatory oversight where some inhibitors are regulated and some are not, and to full regulatory oversight where all inhibitors are captured or require registration. And in New Zealand, we're currently in that kind of partial state because of our interim measure, and the intent is to move into full regulatory oversight. Now, what are the reasons for this? Well, there's various reasons. Firstly, inhibitors do not fit well within the existing regulatory regime. The mitigation technology may still be underdeveloped. There could be a lack of awareness, or their use is still limited. But policy is still evolving in countries in how they could be managed. One important thing to note there is on the international stage, there's currently no MRL set for inhibitors in Codex, but New Zealand has managed to achieve an in-principle agreement for Codex to consider a request for setting MRLs for inhibitors. Just a final message before I finish up. The regulatory landscape internationally will change as these products become more and more prominent and more knowledge and understanding of these grow. And that would happen in New Zealand as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Do we have any questions from the floor? Nope, everybody's getting hungry. I'll ask the final question. Timelines for your permanent solution?
Timelines. Yeah, so we're doing it for a regulatory systems amendment bill, which is basically bills that make minor technical or non-contentious amendments to acts. And this bill will make multiple amendments to various MPI acts. Now, the timeframe is uncertain, but we're hoping that we will be able to introduce that bill into the House in March or April. But that is dependent on kind of Parliament priorities. Yeah. But we do have that interim measure right now to kind of deal and manage risks for the moment.
Thank you, Sal. So if everybody, we can just join me in thanking all of our speakers again this afternoon. And I'll now let you off for lunch. We will ask you to try and be back for 1:30 and see if we can get ourselves back on track for this afternoon. So enjoy your lunch and thank you again.